This lesson is 1850s Turbulence. It's based on 10.3 in the textbook. 10.3 is called New Political Parties. I call the lesson 1850s Turbulence because the two biggest things in the lesson and in the textbook have more to do with turbulent political events in the country as opposed to new political parties. You get the 1848 election. Zachary Taylor, general from the Mexican War, wins. He is a Whig. There's a third party, the Free Soil Party. They stand for making sure there's no slavery in the territories. The Democratic candidate, Lewis Cass, devises a new policy called popular sovereignty, in which the settlers of a territory will have a vote to determine whether it's free or it's slave. Popular sovereignty will be more in depth later in this lesson and will be co-opted by another leader that we'll talk about later in this lesson. You get the Compromise of 1850, and you get this compromise because California asked, this is post the Mexican War, California is admitted or wants to be admitted as a state. Slave states don't want this because Californians want to be a free state. So Henry Clay, after negotiating with Daniel Webster and John Calhoun will oppose this. Daniel Webster from Massachusetts will be in favor of it. People in Massachusetts will be very upset with him over that, but okay. Clay proposes essentially a compromise in which there's 5 separate laws that will get California into the Union but still give the slave states something. And it becomes something like, if you follow any professional sports when there's a very complicated 3-team or 4-team trade, it becomes something like that, where there's very moving parts and different things going on to make sure that all sides are as close to satisfied as possible. So California is admitted as a free state. New Mexico and Utah will have that popular sovereignty where they decide for themselves, which means the people who can vote, the white men, will vote on whether or not they'll be free or slave. Congress will abolish the sale of slaves in Washington, D.C., but not slavery in Washington, D.C. Texas gives up its claims to New Mexico for $10 million. That's not that big a deal. And then the big part, notice I put it in red, the Fugitive Slave Act, passed into law. It says that citizens are required to assist in the return of all slaves who have escaped. What that means is that every United States citizen, north or south, if they hear anything, oh, Farmer Brown, I heard there's a runaway slave at his place, you are then obligated to do something about it, to then report that to the authorities. What that means is that everybody, north, south, abolitionist, slaveholder, you are all now slavery enforcers. This brings slavery right to the north. It basically makes everyone in the north slavery sheriffs. And so those that were maybe anti-slavery but not really willing to join the abolition movement, this lights the abolition movement on fire. Calhoun's going to oppose the compromise. Webster favors it. Most in Massachusetts did not like it, and Webster's career kind of ends on a bad note. Congress will pass this. It passes in 1850. When Clay first proposes it, Congress kind of stands in the way. Calhoun's in the way. And then also you have Zachary Taylor, who comes out opposed to it from a more of a, he's opposed to extending slavery. And people didn't really realize that. What happens in 1850? Calhoun dies. Zachary Taylor dies. The new president, John Taylor, is a Democrat from the South, and he's willing to go along with this. And so Stephen Douglas, who we'll learn about more in a minute, he shepherds this through and gets the Compromise of 1850 passed. We have California admitted as a free state, but now these territories, Utah and New Mexico, can decide for themselves. They have popular sovereignty. This time we get the Know-Nothings. It's basically a movement in which it's nativist, dislike of newcomers, dislike of the new immigrants coming from Europe, and dislike of the Catholics who are arriving. You get the American Party. They pledge to work against Irish Catholic candidates, and they campaign to make laws requiring immigrants to wait longer to become U.S. citizens. Formatting got a little messed up there. Then we get the KansasNebraska Act, 1854. So Senator Stephen Douglas takes up the idea of popular sovereignty, and he suggests giving Kansas and Nebraska popular sovereignty, letting the people in the territory decide whether or not to allow slavery. Well, that's a little controversial. Here's why. This line here is the Missouri Compromise. It says that there will be no slavery in the Louisiana territory. It's all the land west of the Mississippi, drained by the Mississippi, that Jefferson bought from Napoleon. All this land north of this line, except for Missouri, there will be no slavery. This is Nebraska. This is Kansas. Both of these are north of that line and within the Louisiana Purchase territory. So what it does is it repeals the Missouri Compromise of 1820. Notice this Missouri territory right here in green, there's Nebraska, there's Kansas. They were supposed to be closed to slavery under the Missouri Compromise. Now they are open to it again. And essentially one of the pushbacks against this is the Republican Party forms. It's there to stop the slave power, as it was called in the South. The slave power is essentially the idea that the South is winning all these battles about whether or not there'll be slavery in territories. And they seem to have more power than their population would indicate. So the Republican Party forms in 1854 with a goal of stopping slavery and especially stopping it in the territories. And that's where we end with this lesson.